My name is Magdalena Frembeck. I'm the head of sustainability reporting and strategy at Ethos, a management consultancy based in Stockholm, Sweden, and we are specialized in sustainability. That's the only thing that we do. And I'm glad so many could join us here today. And you will be listening to myself and my colleague, Elvira Melin, as we will be talking about the CSRD, ESRS, and the updates in the GRI standards, and sort of focusing a bit on what that means for this reporting season, really. The sustainability reporting overall, but have a bit of an emphasis on where we are right now. Right. So today's agenda, we'll just start by sort of going through a brief overview of the sustainability reporting directives and standards in place today, and sort of just touch upon the move from one thing to another. And then we'll go a little bit deeper into the CSRD and the ESRS and the key updates to the GRI standards, and then focus on what's the practical implications for the 2022 reports. Because we know that obviously it's beginning of December, meaning that most of you here today will already be well underway with your reports, or maybe some late bloomers are just stressing to get started, and obviously want to know what you can and should be focusing on given the time frame. Because as Elvira, when she goes into some of the details about the CSRD and the ESRS, you'll see that there's a lot of work, and that will obviously, most of you will be doing that in the upcoming year and not in the upcoming month. All right, so we can, let's move ahead. Okay, so just to get the brief overview, where are we? On the left-hand side, you see the non-financial reporting directive, the NFRD. I'm sure all of you here are quite aware of this legislation. It has been in place since 2016. Since we are here in Sweden, we also note that this is incorporated into the Swedish Annual Accounts Act, the Svenska årsredovisningslagen. And this one, during the past few years, companies in Sweden and in Europe, in the EU, have been allowed to really do sustainability reports with or without a standard. A lot of companies have used the GRI standards, which is the most commonly applied reporting standard when it comes to sustainability reporting. So that has been used by many companies, but it's been completely voluntary. Now, as we are moving from the NFRD to the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which was passed adopted just a few weeks ago, part of this legislation, not only is it a law sort of dictating the details of what you need to put into the report, part of that is also the establishment of the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And we will go into detail on what the GRI standards means in relation to the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the benefits there are with already reporting in accordance with the GRI, and how you can think about the transition moving forward. If we look to sort of the legislation and the standards, which are very comprehensive, and it's difficult to summarize it all into one slide, but some of the key implications that we see is, well, first of all, there will be less freedom of choice, as in you could before, historically, or even today, decide whether or not you want to use a reporting standard. If you fall under the legislation, you will be required to use the standards. So that means that in a few years' time, we will be seeing standardized sustainability reporting, which is a lot more strict, and it will be handled in a way which is then similar to financial reporting, which is also one of the end goals of the EU, which is improving quality of sustainability reporting and quality of the data. The reporting will also make the reports a lot more comprehensive in scope, since all the relevant business activities of the company and the value chain has to be included in the analysis. When it comes to metrics, there's sort of that depends situation, but overall we see that the reporting boundaries have grown significantly. And lastly, we talk about a different level of transparent disclosures here, where not only the data points, as in the quantitative data, but also the disclosure of processes, the methods, what type of analysis has gone into describing the materiality analysis, or even describing a biodiversity vulnerability assessment. That has to be described in writing in the report. And that's, of course, a big difference from before. And of course, the data needs to be traceable and verifiable, as in we will have limited assurance on the sustainability reporting as of the CSRD, and it could move to reasonable assurance after a few years. So those are sort of the key implications that we have identified and that we are working to prepare our customers, clients for. And I think many of you might have seen, especially in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of communal articles coming out, both in this sort of established press, but also in social media such as LinkedIn, where there's discussions about sort of ESG, sustainability reporting, the quality of it, ESG ratings. Can you trust an ESG rating? And saying how some companies with very unsustainable activities could still have a high ESG rating due to their good reporting, so to speak. And the situation today is basically that the best reporting can and has been interpreted sometimes as the most sustainable. And we put that in quotation marks, given that it's not actually an assessment of sustainability, but rather an assessment of just reporting. But that is how many have assessed it as sustainability. And that's one of the reasons why companies who might not have the highest sustainability performance might still end up with good ratings, as in the reporting is good and the governance structures are in place. And soon, as in the coming, maybe even starting now, but definitely from 2024 and onwards, the best reporting will now give a more, what we see as an accurate indication of sustainability, as in it's not a guarantee for anything, but given the standardized nature of sustainability reporting as we move forward and the requirement for external assurance, and also the comprehensiveness and the scope of the CSRD and how much you need to report on and the analysis that has to go in, is that it will give a more accurate indication of sustainability. And then we can, of course, connect that to the thresholds defined by the EU taxonomy and the principal adverse impacts as reported on in connection to the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. So we are hoping and waiting for sustainability reporting that will actually allow all stakeholders to better assess the sustainability and sustainability work of companies who are reporting. And with that said, I think it's time for me to hand over.
Yes.
So I'm just gonna
unmute myself. I think if you just take off the sound, I think we'll be good, actually. These are the two least technical people in Ethos, I believe, now hosting a webinar. But yes, I will get into the details of CSRD, ESRS, and the GRI standards. And of course, these are very comprehensive. So when I say get into the details, it will still be brief details, just so we can cover all three of them. So starting with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the big difference also is that a lot more companies will be covered compared to the NFRD. So here, all large companies that meet at least 2 of the 3 criteria below will be required to report. And that is that you have more than 250 employees, that you have 40 million euros in turnover and that you have 20 million in total assets euros. And usually when this is transferred into, for example, the Swedish legislation, they will have their own requirements based on the Swedish kronor instead of the euros as well. And a new thing as well is that all listed companies, including small and medium-sized companies, will be included as well. So the only ones excluded there are micro companies that are listed. That is usually if you have less than 10 employees. And I don't remember the exact financial figures, but very small companies. But depending on your size, you will also have to do the reporting in different times. So this legislation will be in place from the financial year of 2024, and that will be for all those companies that are currently covered by the NFRD. And that will be for the report that they publish in 2025. In 2025, you have all other large companies. So those are the ones that follow under the criteria to the left. They will have to publish a report in 2026. And then you have, for a report published in 2027, all the SMEs that are listed. Yes. So this is just a brief overview of who will be covered. And as Magdalena mentioned, one of the main things in CSRD is that when you report according to CSRD, you will have to use the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which is why we thought it's better to get into what these details mean. So the ESRS consists of sector-specific standards, which are being developed from next year onwards, I believe. And they essentially mean that if you belong to a specific sector, such as oil and gas or coal or agriculture or food, you will have maybe, and we don't know the extent here yet, but a few extra KPIs and qualitative disclosures that you will have to report on. But what has been drafted and published already, and what we'll focus on right now, are the sector agnostic standards that you can see right now on the screen. So there are two cross-cutting standards. They describe how to do the reporting, including the underlying analysis, such as the materiality analysis that you will have to conduct in order to identify which other aspects that you will have to include. So there are 10 as of right now. There used to be 11, and then one was, or two of the governance-related ESR standards were merged. So right now we have 10 ESRS standards, 5 within environmental sustainability. So climate change, pollution, water and marine resources, biodiversity and ecosystems, resource use and circular economy. We have 4 social ESRS standards related to the own workforce, workers in the value chain, affected communities, and consumers and end users. And then, as I said, we have 1 related to governance, and that is business conduct. So the idea here is that you don't have to report on all these areas if they are not material for your organization. So in order to see which of these areas, as well as which specific KPIs that you will need to report on, you will conduct a materiality analysis, which consists of 2 parts. And I will just briefly describe what these mean. So we have to the left a impact materiality. For those of you familiar with GRI reporting, this is very similar to the GRI reporting materiality. And this is the analysis of a company's impact on people and the environment. And GRI adds on that you also look at the economy. And this will be include the potential and actual impact that you could have, both positive and negative impact, and in the short, medium, and long term. So this is quite an extensive analysis that you will do on all of these aspects to identify if there is anything that you could sort of not report on. And here as well, the EU is changing as we've seen, the requirements have changed as we go along. So how to define what is not material could also change over time. So always keep an eye out on the legislations. And the other part of the double materiality is the financial materiality, which is new to some companies. And that is sort of the other perspective. So how you as a company is impacted by sustainability, and that is financially impacted by risks and opportunities related to these sustainability areas. So this will, for a lot of companies, mean that you would have to do additional analysis of your assets, your cash flows, enterprise value, etc., to see how these could be impacted by sustainability. And also here you should look in the short, medium, and long term.
Yeah. I could just mention it for anyone who has used the TCFD.
Yeah. TCFD, the Task Force for Financial Related Climate Disclosures, that is for only environmental aspects and only climate change, but that is similar in the sense that you look at how you're financially impacted by climate risks and opportunities. And in addition here, you're also supposed to take in your input from stakeholders. So both the stakeholders that are using your sustainability reporting, that is investors, potential investors, etc., but also stakeholders impacted by your organization. So that could be your employees, workers in your value chain, customers, etc., to get their input as experts on your impact on them, but also to get their understanding of their expectations. Yes, and now I will get into a little bit how ESRS relates to the GRI standards. So why basically GRI is relevant in this presentation, I will say, that relates a lot to the future legislations. And one key reason here is that the GRI have been involved in the development of the ESRS standards through a formal cooperation agreement with EFRAG, who is responsible for developing these standards. So they have been part of the technical advisor group, expert group, and you can also see that a lot that the GRI standards is in many regards very similar to the ESRS. So we therefore believe that you could use the GRI standards as a way to prepare for ESRS in a few key ways. One reason, of course, is that the GRI provides a formal framework for the sustainability reporting. So it's good to just understand how to follow a standard and apply this ahead of having to understand the ESRS standards. Also, as I mentioned on the previous slide, the impact materiality of the ESRS draws on the process in the GRI with a focus on the impact on people, including on their human rights, the environment, but also, as the GRI adds, the impact that you will have on the economy, for example, through creation of jobs in a specific community. And here in the GRI, there is, and here you could also fill in, Magdalena, but when it comes to human rights, that is specifically, and the potential negative impact on people's human rights has maybe in one way a larger focus in the GRI that is aligned with due diligence processes.
Well, I'd say that that is true that the GRI have decided to align their standards with other frameworks and international principles such as the UN guiding principles. But there is a similarity, I'd say, in the ESRS as in human rights are to be considered throughout the materiality process as well as in reporting. So that's something that if we look to the years that have passed with the NFRD, one of the conclusions that were made when they sort of assessed the quality of reporting in the EU was that a special reporting on human rights has not been sufficient, and that has probably been, related to a lack of understanding of human rights issues, or maybe a bit of a feel an unwillingness to report on human rights, since that can feel a bit scary for some companies, I assume, if you have been found to have issues here. So the legislators are simply pushing for this to be improved. So that's just the way we're going, and the GRI decided to do the same thing.
And I will also note that the process for stakeholder engagement in the GRI is also similar as in ESRS. In GRI, previously, the main focus was to understand stakeholder expectations, but now there's also in GRI a larger focus on actually seeing your stakeholders as experts on your impact as a company and involve them throughout the materiality process rather than seeing them as one input source, which is also aligned with ESRS.
One thing that we can be certain will completely, if not die completely straight away, it will fade, is the possibility of doing a materiality assessment in a workshop of, say, 4 people over 2 hours, which we know has happened in many cases, typically a result of maybe, being short on time, short on resources, and just, a solution in the case. But now, given the scope, the comprehensiveness of all of the sustainability matters in the ESRS, and also in, and how the materiality process has been described, both if you look at the GRI or the ESRS, it will mean a lot more involvement from stakeholders as experts, as I mentioned. So that's one thing to start doing, is just engaging more parts of, more functions of the company. And depending on what industry you're in and what type of expertise you have, it could also be a question of engaging subject matter experts that are external to the company in order to assess some of these impacts. But that's the big job that will happen, and maybe not now, just before Christmas.
No. And a final point here is that there are a lot of overlapping disclosures and data points in GRI and ESRS. So if you've already measured, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, or you've measured diversity among your workforce, a lot of these disclosures are very similar in the ESRS. So you will just maybe have to do minor adjustments in how you present the data, but you can be knowing that you're well prepared for ESRS if you've already started to measure sort of the difficult data points in the GRI as well. So that's why our recommendation is that companies already reporting in accordance with the GRI could continue to do so to prepare for the ESRS, and those not doing so could look at the GRI as a way to start preparing. And also until CSRs, there are a few reports left. This will also then be an assurance of good quality of the report, that you've actually followed a framework, even though it's voluntary. That will give a little bit extra credibility. Yes, moving on. So as Magdalena mentioned as well, the GRI standards have, to make it more complicated, also just been updated. So all the reports that are published in accordance with the GRI standards from 1st of January 2023. So I assume all the sustainability reports being developed right now will have to be made in accordance with the new standards. So there have been a few updates. So when it comes to the topic-specific standards, I mentioned greenhouse gas emissions or employee data, most of this remain the same. So you don't have to find new disclosures for your material topics, but it's rather related to the other parts, the general disclosures and material topics that have been updated. So the 3 main updates, as we'll see, is that the general disclosures have been updated. So what used to be called in the old GRI, the 102 standards, are now called GRI 2. And there used to be 56 general disclosures, and they have been cut down to 30, which apply to all companies. So before, there used to be a comprehensive reporting standard and a core, and now there's only one way of reporting in accordance with the GRI. And also a new thing is that out of these 30 general disclosures, there are only 5 of them that are strictly mandatory. So that means that And that is number 1 to 5. So it means that for all the others, you could do a mission if you, for example, do not have the data is company sensitive, or it's not relevant to your business. But this needs to be described in the GRI index.
Yeah. If you are already using GRI standards and have been using the old version, and not been doing comprehensive reporting, many of these disclosures you will not have included in your sustainability report, but you might have them in your corporate governance report. So do take a look, because as I mentioned, you will have to include them in the index and do omissions, even if you're not reporting on them. So do a quick review to make sure that you are not missing out on a big chunk of general disclosures.
Yeah. Just to fill out on that, a lot of that relates to how the, for example, board of directors and the management team is involved in the sustainability governance. So the information, a lot of the information related to board of directors and executive management you have in your management report, but then there might be some update related to their involvement in sustainability. And that might be very difficult to sometimes understand what that could look like. But for example, think about, have they been involved in the materiality analysis as, engaged as stakeholders? Have you presented, have you had workshop with them related to sustainability? Are they responsible for approving, drafting, or have the ownership of policies? Have they approved the material topics? These things. I think a lot of companies, the board of directors and executive management are more involved than you might first think. A second key takeaway is that the disclosures related to the management approach have been updated. So before you had the 103, and now you have GRI 3, management of material topics. And these 3 are also strictly mandatory. And these relate a lot to describing the process of how the materiality analysis was conducted. That includes the method, it includes any thresholds that you might have that are company specific, related to how you define what is a material topic and what is not. It also includes in this case that you have to explain your impact related to each material topic. So of course you could do this when you might have one chapter related to your materiality analysis where you describe the process, and then when you describe how you work with employees, you can also there describe your impact on your employees.
And it's in the GRI 3. If you open GRI 3 and read it in detail, and then you open the ESRS 1, the first one on the general requirements, that you will see the similarities and sometimes even like the complete paragraphs that are just the same on materiality, on the description of impact. So then you'll see what we mean when there's a lot of benefits from using the GRI now or learning from the GRI process as we move to the ESRS.
Yeah. And then GRI as well as ESRS is also developing sector-specific standards. And currently there are only 3 sector standards published: oil and gas, coal, and agriculture. But more are being developed starting from 2023. Yeah, and it's also like, besides from ESRS, it's also aligned with many other standards and legislations that have sector-specific data. Yes, moving on. So now we thought we've get into some practical implications for the 2022 sustainability reports. We've already mentioned some as we went along, but here are some of the key practical takeaways that we see. The first one relates to the data collection, and here an advice is to read the ESRS, or at least the sort of content pages or indexes in the beginning of them, to map if there are any data points that you know will be relevant for you to report in CSRD, and that you might could try to measure already this year. So if you know that you, for example, that you're a producing company, you probably produce a lot of waste. You haven't measured this already, but you assume then that the aspect related to resource use and circular economy could be relevant for you. You could already now look at the data points and see if there's anything you could try to measure this year. Also, you could collect the data, and then if it's not maybe the best quality, you don't have to publish it this year, but you could publish it next year and ensure that when CSRD is sharp, the data quality will be good enough. A second advice relates to the governance structure. So both of these frameworks require you to explain the governance structure in more detail, including, as I mentioned, how the board of directors and executive management are involved in sustainability and their in the sustainability governance. So just explain this in more detail. A third recommendation that we also discussed on the previous slide relates to the impact analysis. So as we mentioned, ESRS has both the impact analysis and the financial analysis, but considering there are only a few months for your sustainability report to be published, if you haven't got already a financial materiality, that you don't have time to conduct one right now, but you could have time to improve your impact analysis, as well as how you describe the process and the results in the sustainability report, which, as Magdalena said, is a key part of both ESRS and also of GRI 3, if you want the exact details. And then also to test your data quality, as was also mentioned, there will be a requirement of a limited data assurance in CSRD, which could then become a reasonable data assurance. And you could, of course, already now test the quality of some of your data points through an external assurance, just to make sure that you understand the process and maybe are prepared again in a few years' time. And you don't have to test all your data, of course. A recommendation is to test maybe your greenhouse gas emission, that is scope 1, 2, 3, already now, maybe because that's one of the most extensive data points that also has a lot of underlying material and data. From, if you're a large company with a lot of subsidiaries and groups, there's a lot of people involved, and there are a lot of flight tickets, energy bills, etc., that need to be collected in one place. Yes, so these were sort of the practical advice that we have, but also just kind of to leave you with an advice that is maybe a bit more long lasting and looking forward. So one version is, of course, to we know a lot of companies are sort of feeling that these legislations that come up are difficult, and it's always about trying to be compliant and adapt your business as you go along. But you could also see these increased regulations, and in addition to CSRD, you know, the taxonomy, SFDR, etc., as an opportunity to actually change your company at core. So advice here is to rethink what sustainability is within your organization, to ensure that this is not just an add-on, but it's actually a fundamental part of your business. Maybe your business strategy, maybe your business offerings, etc. And then also that might mean that you have to redo some inadequate or insufficient analysis as part of your sustainability work. So this could include both risk and opportunity assessments, materiality assessments. It can include a general business strategy if you want to integrate your sustainability strategy into this one, etc. So ensure that you build on the present ambitions and challenges that are facing the organization right now. And this also means that you have to restructure most likely the sustainability governance in order to ensure that the opportunities are seized and that the risks are managed. And here, I think one core that we see in the coming legislations is to take the responsibility of the sustainable reporting higher up in the organizations, because soon, you know, executive management and board members will have to respond to how well they are aware of you know, the sustainability agenda, etc., in your company.
And if I could just connect to the last point here about rethinking what sustainability is within the organization. I was in a conversation the other day when we spoke about, a few years ago, there was a lot of people saying, in a few years' time, there will not be a chief sustainability officer, or there will not be a head of sustainability in the companies because it will be integrated everywhere. And years have passed. And I think for anyone who's working with sustainability at companies knows how difficult it is to actually get the entire organization to work with sustainability, besides maybe following a policy or doing some trainings or supporting and implementing a part of the strategy. But it is quite a challenge. So I think we're still in this situation where most companies are not really working with that in an integrated way, which is not weird at all. However, if we were to connect it again to the legislation, part of it is also saying, okay, so based on your materiality assessments and when you have identified negative sustainability impacts or sustainability risks connected to the financial materiality or opportunities, describe if and how the company business model and strategy has been adapted, updated, changed to meet or account for those findings. So you can hear that what they are looking for, they're saying, okay, are you doing something to change to actually handle this and not just, you know, put a lid on it? What that means is, or to do that, to change that business model, that's a, you know, completely different story. But the integration, the rethinking of sustainability will be part of that. And that will have to go beyond the sustainability team. And now obviously we have a lot of CFOs on board in sustainability, given the developments. We acknowledge the challenges, but we would really like to see this as an opportunity. Like, do you want to be in business in 20 or 30, 40 years time, or do you not want to be in business?
Yeah. That relates a little bit to our next slide. I just wanted to mention as well, I forgot to mention in the beginning, but if you have any questions, please write them in the chat, because I think we have some time at the end for addressing any questions that you might have. And if we don't have the time to address all of them, we can of course revert by email. But filling out on what you said, we believe that when you do take these big steps, so both do all these analysis that we've mentioned before, but also if you actually rethink and restructure your organization, this we believe that you will have a very positive outcome as well. So one thing is that we see that, of course, capital is steered towards sustainable investments. So that means that if you have good data in place and you're able to prove that you have a positive development, both positive impact on society, but also that you actually have good results compared to like over time, so that you could actually decrease, for example, greenhouse gas emissions over time. This will most likely gain you more investments, etc. And we can also see that the demand for green bonds, etc., is also very high. And companies with sustainable business models have an easy time finding investments. We can also see that it creates comparability and transparency. And this also, with complying to regulations, also help companies to avoid fines, sanctions, and reputational damage that come with that. And a little bit of what Magda said about being a relevant company 20 years from now, but also just looking 5 years from now or 1 year from now, I could see that the younger generation, such as the one that myself and Magdalena belong to, there is a much higher demand for sustainable products, and companies that are sort of, you know, sustainable or unsustainable, if we even want to use that term, but companies with maybe accidents in their value chain that they related to poor governance, for example, are likely to have very poor reputation. So this is something to think about, just change consumer preferences, for example.
So we had a question on, can I do that?
Yeah.
On the question if mandatory CSRD reporting is for the 2023 or the 2024 report. So it got postponed. It used to be for 2023. Now it's for 2024, meaning that the first report will be published 2025 for the financial year 2024. But as Elvira showed a slide with a few timelines, so it sort of depends on who you are as a company. But I will include a link in the Q&A box, and into, maybe I can do an entire thing as well. I'll just include a link, which is to the official press release from the EU, where you'll see the a summary of the timeline. And at the bottom of the press release, you'll see a link to the legal text as well. So 2024 is the earliest, but depending on size, it could be later.
Yeah. Thank you for clearing that out. And a final point here on the positive outcome as well. As we mentioned, it will prepare you for the future, in help in mitigating risks and create a resilient organization in these changing society. So both, as I mentioned on the previous slide, related to change customer preferences, for example, or just meeting the legal requirements. It could also relate to actually adapting to a changing environment, as in climate change. And what does that mean for your supply chain? Where can you, if you are producing company which require resources from other parts of the world, what does that mean for complex supply chains in terms of transportation, but also, changed weather patterns, etc. So these are risks that could be mitigated as well through sustainability related processes, such as risk management processes, and also the impact analysis, for example. So these were some of our, I hope, positive end message. That is that if you do all this work that we've talked about, which could be quite extensive, it will be a positive outcome, and it will have a positive impact on your business. And we will get to some more questions as well. And please feel free to write any questions that you might have, because we have some time here at the end. We also want to recommend you to watch our previous webinars on YouTube. We had one, I think the other week, that was an introduction to sustainable finance. We also had one on the EU taxonomy, etc. So if you want to learn more about those regulations, you can go on the YouTube. And then we also have a coming webinar that is very related to what we have talked about today. So we've talked about the reporting in general, but if you're interested in only the collection of sustainability data and across different regulations, so not only CSRD, but also the EU taxonomy, you can watch our next webinar on the 14th of December between 9 and 10 Central European Standard Time, with our colleagues Niklas Winge and Ida. And Niklas is head of our digital solutions and our digital platform Atlas. Did we have any more questions?
Well, the one question is if we will distribute it. I think it's recorded. Yes. So they will be distributed on YouTube. Will the presentation material also be shared?
Yeah, we will send out the presentation material to all attendees, I believe, yes, which also includes our contact information if you have any follow-up questions. Yes.
And I could also, I'll just include another link here into the chat, which is the Q&A that the GRI published yesterday. So if anyone's in here is a GRI reporter and still thinking about the benefits, or if it's worth it to stick with the GRI, let's see, where's the chat? That's the one here. So here's a second link. This is the GRI's Q&A, which they published yesterday, on how the GRI are connected to ESRS and how you can use that as the sort of transition, journey transition period.
Yes, but I can see we have no more questions, and we will also, as I mentioned, send out this presentation with contact info. So if you have any questions that come up later, or as you're doing this, if you're conducting your sustainable reports, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. And with that, I hope you have a great day.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.